At 1300 hours local time, the US military was tracking a narco-submarine that didn't know it was already caught 400 meters northeast of the Galapagos Islands. In about 4 hours, this sub would reach shipping lanes where it could vanish among 1,000 legitimate contacts. But the crew of this circling HC-130J didn't know yet that this spectacular narco-sub had one trick up its sleeve that would turn a routine interdiction into a three-way standoff at sea. The radar operator stared at his screen, watching a contact that barely existed. 3 sweeps visible, 9 sweeps gone, like somebody flicking a light switch on and off in another room. This contact gave back almost nothing, just occasional flickers when waves exposed metal outboards on what had to be a fiberglass hull. 8 knots told the whole story. Nobody legitimate moved that slow this far from anywhere. 8 knots meant 3 tons of contraband riding, low enough to wash the deck with every swell. The bearing matched known smuggling routes running from Colombia to Mexico, where product changed hands and prices tripled. No fishing grounds for 200 miles, no shipping lanes. No reason to be here except the obvious one. The tactical coordinators switched to thermal imaging, and the ghost track became solid. These low-profile vessels rode with 18 in above water, painted gray-blue to match the ocean, invisible beyond 500 man-hours to anything except the technology now staring down from 5 man-hours up. But spotting it was the easy part. Actually getting to it was a whole other story. The problem was simple mathematics. The closest Coast Guard ship, the Seneca, could make 20 knots if her turbines didn't complain. She was 50 ailmer away, 2 1/2 hours to intercept at flank speed, its fastest speed available. The smugglers would reach congested waters in 4 at this rate. The kind of math that meant mission failure, unless you had something that flew instead of sail. Senega's flight deck transformed into controlled chaos the moment the intercept data arrived. The helicopter crew got their scramble within minutes, and pre-flight checks cut in half. Weapons loaded while rotors were still tied down, fuel calculations scribbled on kneeboards already wet with spray. The intercept point was 150 meters out, about an hour flight just to get there. The MH-65 carried enough fuel for 3.5 hours of flight, but combat maneuvering drank fuel a lot faster. They'd need to stop the smugglers, babysit them for 3 hours until Seneca arrived, then somehow have enough fuel to provide overwatch during the boarding. The fuel computer kept showing the same answer, paid land with fumes in the tanks and prayers on their lips. The gunner checked the M240 mount while pilots ran through startup. Yesterday, the Traverse motor had stuck solid. Salt corrosion in the bearings, freed with penetrating oil and hope. Salt ate everything on a ship eventually. It just had a preference for eating critical systems during operations. The helicopter lifted off and banked toward an intercept that would happen with margins measured in gallons, not miles. The pilot watched his fuel gauge the way gamblers watched their last chips, knowing every minute at high power meant 2 minutes less endurance. Meanwhile, Seneca charged through the Pacific swells, her captain understanding she'd have to get there before the smugglers could destroy evidence. It was now a race against time, and the smugglers just had to turn one valve and the whole sub would start floating with water. They could not let that happen. The MH-65 arrived overhead at 14:15 local time, dropping through clear skies toward the narco-sub. The pilot brought them down to 200 FT, and the rotor wash hit the ocean like an invisible hammer. The water beneath them turned into a mess of spray and foam. Waves radiating outward, making the low-profile vessel rock and swells it never signed up for. The gunner grabbed the M240's controls to start the warning shot sequence. The mount didn't move. He tried again. Nothing. The Traverse motor was locked solid frozen at 45 degrees off the helicopter's nose. Salt had crystallized in the bearings, creating 40 answer lub of resistance in a system designed for 2. They had a machine gun that couldn't aim and 2 hours to hold position with it. The pilot made the adjustment without discussion. He brought the helicopter into a sliding hover, flying sideways at 50 knots to line up the frozen gun. It's not something you'd find in any manual, but these Coast Guard pilots don't always fly by the manual. They fly by what works. The fuel flow jumped immediately, 95 gall instead of 76, but they needed those warning shots more than they needed perfect fuel economy. First burst hit the water 100 in ahead of the narco-sub. The smugglers didn't react, maintaining 8 knots like nothing happened. Maybe they thought the sideways approach was some kind of equipment failure. They were half right. The equipment had failed, but the crew hadn't. The pilot brought them around for another pass, holding the awkward angle while the gunner tried to muscle the mount free. Salt is patient and steel is stubborn, but Coast G-Guard gunners are both. Second burst, 50 NCHs from the bow. Still no response from below. Third pass, 10 chiarments. The rounds hit close enough that the smugglers could probably feel the impacts through the hole. That did it. All their outboards shut down at once. A sudden silence strange after the constant drone. The narco-sub went from barely moving to completely still, drifting in the swells while 3 men below contemplated their life choices. The helicopter settled into an orbit pattern 200 FT up. Frozen guns still pointing sideways like a broken weather vane. They'd stopped the vessel. That was step 1. Step 2 was keeping it stopped. And the smugglers' buddies had other plans in mind. 12 minutes into holding, the radar lit up with new problems. 2 contacts approaching from the southwest, moving at 40 knots. At that speed, they'd arrive in 12 minutes. The pilot kept his orbit over the narco-sub, but started dividing his attention between what he was guarding and what was coming. Protection boats are standard cartel procedure. They ran 10 to 15 minutes behind their submarines, close enough to help, far enough to deny involvement if things went sideways. These weren't rescue vessels. They were insurance policies with outboards and attitude. The boats closed to Fort Noircermi and started their own circle, maintaining 2,000 MR's distance, just outside effective small arms range, but close enough to matter. The pilot could see them clearly. Go fast boats with multiple people on deck. They were testing, probing, trying to figure out what the helicopter would do if pushed. One boat darted toward the narco-sub, closing to 1,500 meters before the pilot swung the nose toward it. Even with a broken gun mount, the helicopter pointing at you meant something. The boat veered off, but his partner immediately moved in from the opposite side. Pack tactics, trying to split the helicopter's attention. The gunner was still fighting with the M240 mount, trying to break it free through pure determination. Every time a boat approached, he'd wrestle the gun toward it, managing maybe 10 degrees of movement before the Salt won again. The protection boats probably had their own weapons. AK-47s were cartel standard. At this range, accuracy was questionable, but lucky shots are still ones you don't want to take. For 15 minutes, this dance continued. Boats approaching and retreating, helicopter pivoting to track them, narco subcrew watching their backup probe American responses. The pilot was burning fuel at combat power settings, watching his gauge drop while Seneca was still over 90 minutes out. The protection boats knew the math too. They were trying to wait out the helicopter's fuel state, force it to leave for the ship, or risk swimming home. The boats made one more aggressive pass, both closing to 800 meters simultaneously from opposite directions. The pilot had to choose which boat to face. He chose neither. Instead, climbing to 500 FT to show he could engage both if needed. The message was clear. Broken gun or not, outnumbered or not, this helicopter wasn't leaving. The protection boats got it. They turned southwest and opened throttles, racing toward international waters at 45 knots. They hadn't rescued anyone, hadn't recovered any cargo, but they'd managed to make the helo burn through fuel it didn't have. Below them, the narco subcrew had stopped moving. But stopping a vessel and actually boarding it were 2 very different problems, especially when the seas were building and time was running out. Seneca finally arrived on scene, creating a steel wall between the narco sub and escape. She slowed to 5 knots while the deck crew prepped the rib for launch. The seas were running 6 FT with 8-footers building. Not terrible yet, but the barometer was dropping fast. In an hour, maybe 2, launching would be impossible. The David, which is the crane you see here, swung the 7M long rigid hull inflatable boat or rib over the water. 8,600 lb of boat and operators hanging from a steel cable rated for nearly double that. Static rating meant nothing in moving seas. Every wave that passed under multiplied the load. Compression on the way up, tension on the way down. The crane operator watched the wave pattern, counting seconds between crests. 8 seconds meant dropping between waves. 6 seconds meant dropping on one. The moment came between sets. The ocean flattened for maybe 4 seconds, and the operator hit the release. The rib dropped 6 feet and hit the water, engines already running. The coxswain person driving the rib punched the throttles before the next wave arrived. Shooting away from the Seneca's hull at 20 knots, getting crushed between 4,500 tons of steel was nobody's idea of a good time. The helicopter maintained its orbit at 200 Althirf-10 fuel, now down to 134 gallons. The pilot had done the math, witnessed the boarding, provide overwatch, then land back on the Seneca before transforming from a helo into a submarine. The frozen gun didn't matter anymore. The Riv, approaching at 45 knots with 6 rifles on board, was all the firepower this situation needed. The coxswain brought the Riv alongside the narco-sub using the maritime technique called controlled collision. At 45 knots, he aimed for the midship. Then, at the last second, reversed and pivoted the starboard, spinning the boat 90 degrees while slackening forward speed. The ribs slammed sideways into the narco-sub, inflatable collar absorbing the impact, now grinding against the hull as both vessels rose and fell on different wave cycles. First operator jumped when the boats matched height, a 2-second window that wouldn't repeat for another 8. He landed hard on wet fiberglass. 40 lubs of gear and body armor, making it hard to keep balance. But his weapon was already up, sweeping for threats while his legs found their balance. The other officers provided cover just in case these smugglers decided to get any bright ideas. One by one, the officers dragged the smugglers out until all 3 were on deck and another officer could search inside, making sure no one else was hiding down there. After searching the vessel, the Rib and Hilo were safely recovered by the Seneca, and although the criminal groups were already working on their next sub, they learned a lesson that day. With Trump in office, there's a whole new way of doing business. Bye for now.